The Dane and Derek Show is an uncensored, unfiltered podcast. Content warnings can be found in the episode description. Hello, welcome to the Dane and Derek Show, a podcast where two nerdy friends keep in touch and talk about whatever the fuck they want. I'm Derek Aiello, a writer, director, and occasional D&D player, and with me as always is my buddy Dane Fogdull.
Hey, I'm Dane. You changed that intro just a little bit there, but I liked it. I felt that vibe. I'm a writer, musician, podcaster, and lover of tabletop RPGs, which, surprising no one, we have returned to as a topic.
Yeah, surprising no one. Yeah, I was just kind of I feel like this is going to be a hot take episode, so I was like, yeah, let's get the F-bombs in early. Let's just get it out of the
Hot
way.
fucking takes.
Yeah, hot fucking takes. Just like hot pockets, but hot fucking takes.
Mm.
So Dane,
Mm.
what is your least favorite rule in a tabletop RPG?
Ooh. Um. How are we breaking this down? Are we like,
Just something that when you wake up and it's the first thing in your head, it pisses you off about tabletop RPGs. I can go first if you'd like.
yeah, you go first. Give me a second to fucking consider this.
um, I really don't like the spell slot system in Dungeons and Dragons.
5e? Yeah,
Yeah,
fair.
it's just so overly complicated. I don't I understand that you need to differentiate prepared spells from spells you can cast to spells you actually are able to cast and spells that you know, but I feel like if you know the spell, you know the spell, and if you can cast it, you can cast it. Where I get lost is the whole slot thing, and like some classes, you use your slots to prepare a certain number of
Yeah.
spells, and some you just prepare spells and use your slots willy nilly, and others you use slots and very few spells. It's like a little too complicated for me to think about. Because every time I dungeon master and someone has a question, and it's like, oh no, like they're a cleric, that's very different than a wizard, and I can't answer the spell slot question, and it just becomes very yeah, that's that just it's I don't maybe it's because I don't play spellcasters enough, but I do not like spell slots. I prefer the variant rule spell points, where you have a total number where you have a certain number of points and it costs a certain number of points to cast a spell. I much prefer that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I thought of it, and this is going to be a big one.
Okay.
I don't like the D20 system. I
Whoa.
don't I don't like the thing that makes D&D happen.
Wow, that's wild.
So, and I have a reason for it though. I do.
Okay. Okay.
Um, let's just give a very generic situation. And you tell me what happens given all these variables. The difficulty to open a lock is 15. All right, not too high, not too low, no big deal. It's not trapped. It's not nothing. And then I roll an 11. What happens? What happens next? Basically every time.
Um,
I didn't crit fail, mind you. I didn't crit fail. I didn't critically succeed. I just rolled an 11. I didn't even normal
just
succeed.
rolled an 11,
Just rolled an 11.
and we added all your modifiers in
Yep.
on all that
Yep.
stuff.
I rolled probably like a 6 or a 7 on the dice, but you know.
Yeah, it's you just kind of you stick the lockpick in, and you just
Yeah,
can't figure it out.
I just can't figure it out. So what actually happens is probably I'm like, can I try again? Right? And
Mm-hmm.
then I probably get, let's say I get 12, and then I do it again and I get a 16 and I open it. Right? So that can
Mm-hmm.
happen. On the other hand, let's say I were in the middle of combat and armor class 18, I rolled a 15. What happens then? Nothing, right? Like I spend all this time like putting all the numbers together, adding up, rolling dice, taking my turn, and then if I'm like a low level and my whole turn is basically just attacking, that's it. I'm done. Nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the the roll the 1d20 system where you hit a success, a critical success 1 in 20 times, and a critical failure 1 in 20 times. I don't like that at all
Mm-hmm.
because nothing happens so often.
Yeah.
We spend all this time rolling dice and often nothing happens. And it just feels like just wasted energy in a
Yeah.
sense, and also just not representative, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you were in a fight and you fucking swung like for the fences, right? Like, and you miss, like you actually miss, you have probably opened yourself up to a return stroke.
Mm-hmm.
Probably something is going to go bad for you, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so I don't find the mechanic to help. It often feels like just sitting around until people can hit a number, right? And
Yeah.
in such a way, it feels like the die roll is relatively speaking unimportant.
Yeah. That is a really great way to put it. Because in a system like Dungeon World or Masks or Monster of the Week or even Quest, which uses a D20 but does not adhere to the regular D20 sort of difficulty. It uses a more powered by the apocalypse kind of um, system where, under a certain number is failure, within a certain range is success at a cost, and then over a certain range is outright success.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of get a little bit more of what you're talking about, which is like there's a little bit more not only drama in the storytelling, but you can succeed, but at a price. And it's like failure becomes interesting a lot more
Yes.
than just like, okay, yeah, you didn't hit it. Someone else try. Let's try and buff so and so, so we can up the break the difficulty class, and
Yeah.
it just becomes like a numbers game.
Right. And so with a different system, like you said, failure should be interesting. Um, which is why one very important thing about those games that they don't really tell you, things like Dungeon World and the like, as a GM, only ask for dice rolls when failure is interesting, and otherwise just let players succeed.
Yeah.
Um, I've come to the philosophy that often these games become moments for storytelling, and if you're
Hmm.
going to take away agency, like and leave it to chance, if you're going to take agency away from a player and leave it to chance, something interesting better be potentially possible for them to not get their way, right? And interesting does not mean like nice for the player, certainly. Um, but in D&D, if you fail to miss and you don't crit fail, which kind of has a certain amount of house rules to it anyways, um, the worst that happens is you kind of wasted your turn. In Dungeon World, if you failed on an attack, well, maybe your sword's broken now, you're down on the ground, and you've been poisoned. Not great for you. Very interesting, though. A lot happened
Yeah.
there. Like, the story has taken
Exactly.
a turn, and I think that has a lot of value to it. In the D20 thing's defense, the one thing I think it does well is I think it's pretty okay at increasing difficulty, if that makes sense. Like, it's very easy to tell. Like, a challenge rating 10 lock feels much easier to break into than a challenge uh 25 lock. It just
Right.
does. And there's something to that. On the other hand, if you're quite high leveled and you miss that 10, which is still possible, it feels really fucking bad.
Yeah.
And it feels really dumb.
Yep.
A great piece of GMing advice I once heard was um, Han Solo doesn't miss. Han Solo doesn't trip and fall on his face. Um, which is to say that, like, when you are presenting failures, especially in like the Dungeon World way, or even in a crit fail way in things in like D&D, um,
Uh huh.
a really something really important to like think about is like um often in stories or like in these games it's really easy to just be like you fall on your face, you fail the deck save, you fall on your face. Whereas it feels much better for a player if you spend just a little bit of extra energy to essentially explain how it wasn't really that your character, like, it's not that your character was an idiot or dumb or something. It's that there was something they didn't account for.
Hmm.
The enemy was just a bit better than they expected. Not that,
Right.
so often it's easy to just make all the characters seem like bumbling buffoons, you know?
Hmm.
And I think
Right.
that's easier with the D20 thing. This was supposed to be the intro, rant over for now.
Well, I mean, it does kind of segue into what we're talking about, which is bending the rules in tabletop games, because in a situation where, like, it's a DC 12 lock and you get an 11, as the dungeon master, unless you said it's a DC 12 lock, the players don't have to know that it wasn't a DC 12 lock,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
that it was, so you can bend that and you can be like, yeah, you open it, if they get close enough, which, I know you and I are definitely in the same brainwave of, like, you know, bending the rules to serve the story and the players, which I don't know about you, but I know that for myself, I often sometimes will bend the rules too much and it'll bite me in the ass later.
Yeah.
Uh, like the one thing that I had, like, ever since I screwed it up, I try to never ever bend the rules of death. Uh, because you can very easily ruin a game by accidentally killing someone off, um, or for instance, like, like, I don't know, like bending the rules of how magic items are supposed to work. Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
nobody ever like really thinks about like attunement and stuff like that. Like those very technical nitty gritty um, stuff, and it's I don't know. I feel like every dungeon master at a certain point bends some of the rules to make the game a little bit easier or better. And I'm curious when you like to bend rules in games, or how you go about it.
The most basic way I bend rules is in service to the players in the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I would rather everybody have a good time, and the rules have been played a little fast and loose, than have us played technically correct and people be frustrated or confused or upset. So that sometimes, like back when I played more D&D, that would often mean I'd make sure I had that screen, the dungeon master screen, and I would fudge the dice sometimes because it was just better that way. Um Now I remember when I was playing World pretty early on with a friend, very early, a character went down to 0 hit points, which means that they had to make a very difficult roll or die, basically. Um, and one of the ways to get an actual bonus to that roll is to have a cleric with you, but the cleric has to be second level. There was a cleric. She was not second level. It was the first session. And I was like,
Uh,
I don't really want this character to die yet. That sucks. This other character has a thing. She can see it on her character sheet. This other player really wants to help. And so I made a bargain with her, which is not in the rules, but I was like, hey, I'll let you level now and have this thing, but you have to give up this other thing that was sort of important to her.
mm,
And she made the deal. Um, I try not to like do these things without cost necessarily. It tends to be more like a negotiation on the direction we all want the story to go.
yeah.
Like very rarely am I okay with characters sort of straight up dying
Hmm.
without their players' consent at this point.
100%.
Partially because it's like, nah, that sucks. Like that just sucks. We were here for a good time and just random dice and now you're dead. And also partially because I'm like, random death is sucky storytelling. On the other hand, if you're like, no, 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 the character is dying for a reason, like I'm like, nice, I'm there for that, you know? um,
Yeah.
yeah, and so like I try to bend the rules around those sorts of things. What about you?
I the last time I, like, so I try to bend the rules when it's going to be something like big, like for instance, like what you were saying, like when a character needs to use something but they technically can't use it per the rules,
Mm-hmm.
or they haven't leveled up enough. But like in the case of like the superhero masks game I'm playing right now, there's a lot of things in that game that, well, one, I've never run a masks game, but two, like some of the powers didn't really line up with some of the classes that people wanted to have. So, like I modified that. Like one guy, he plays like an android that can like basically like that's composed of like tiny nanobots, but that doesn't really translate to a power. So I was like, well, maybe it's like transmuting. We'll
Mm-hmm.
call it transmuting.
Yeah.
And another character, they didn't want to be like the elemental like fire class like the Nova. They instead wanted to be the Janus, but they wanted to have like fire powers. So like over the course of the game, like the powers have been like, well, you can just mimic fire. You can't actually use fire too. Well, maybe your character can actually use fire because you're becoming more and more creative with how you use the fire that you can like mimic. So maybe it is more of just actual elemental control. And so like kind of bending the rules in those kinds of ways.
Yeah.
Um and that's been like a healthy amount of it. I think, like I think like in the case of like a season finale, so to speak, of like or a series finale of a campaign, like there's like this one magic item that like I gave a player once in a D&D game that they could cast telekinesis, but I think they had to be like a wizard or something. Like they couldn't be a druid. And I was like, and I was like, just for the sake of the rules, I'm not gonna like, because the player pointed it out, and I was like, no, you can just you can just use that, um, because it made for a really good story point, for this character to use that ability and kind of like in a way like kind of bring sort of round out a really nice like long action scene. So I think like that's where I think I find bending the rules to be helpful. Like when you can, oh, my favorite rule bending one is I have a home rule that I allow people to cast spells at a higher level if they know them at the cost of hit points.
Oh, that's
Uh,
fun.
yeah. Because I just feel like sometimes you like if you want to make that play, you can do it, but it is going to cost you in a way. Like once again, it goes back to that. There's that hard bargain cost. There's that price you have to pay, and I think
Mm-hmm.
when I get off track, it's when I present something that they can do, but I don't have a price. And as a result, it kind of feels weightless, or it just kind of feels like I'm handing them a muffin to go munch on. And I
Yeah.
need to get better about making sure that there is a cost. But having that like hard cost is great, because who doesn't love like a last minute lightning bolt from like you're not supposed to be able to cast it, but you somehow manage to find a way to cast it,
Mm-hmm.
and it costs you, but it also saves the day. That's some great storytelling.
I agree. Question: do you consider house rules to be bending the rules, or do they kind of just sort of transcend that?
Yeah, I'd consider them to be bending the rules, because like I've definitely played in some groups where like the dungeon master's like the book is God, and
Mm-hmm.
we cannot break the book. Uh, I've definitely been in that world, so
Do you think there's
yeah.
value to playing that way?
Um, I think if everyone at the table wants to play that way, there's value.
Mm-hmm. I think,
Because
yeah.
yeah, because then I think because like there are people that like to just kick ass, crunch numbers, and don't mind coming to a game with 10 characters pre-made, you
Fair,
know?
fair. I will also say that I do think that it's a good thing to like be like the book is God if you're like at a convention or you've never really played with these people before, or you're at a shop or something where like
Yeah.
you can't hold the consistency.
Hmm.
um and it's
Yes.
best to just be like, no, we're just using these rules, and it's because we're in this setting.
Yeah. And I think the value that comes from playing a game like that way is sort of the in a way it's like I think when we bend the rules, it's to fulfill that need to like tell a good story and feel something inside of us, feel that fire kind of like roar in a way.
Yeah.
I think when people play and they stick to the rules 110%, I mean, maybe there's like groups out there that are like hardcore like RPing and somehow telling great stories, even though their character fumbles every other attack, because the
Hmm.
dice never lie in that world. But I feel like those groups, they're definitely, the story is in the actual like gameplay of crunching numbers and killing monsters and unlocking chests and the more technical aspects of it. The story's in the dungeon crawl, not so much in the characters,
Yeah.
because I feel
Yeah.
like we're almost always bending the rules to save a character, help a character, or prevent a character from like making it an irreversible decision, in like a negative context, like an out of character irreversible decision that is bad for the character.
Yes. Okay, so I just remembered what my very favorite rule bending that I've ever done is.
Aha.
And it's
Yes.
in Dungeon World. So when you get a 6 or less, the character fails, just like 6 or less on the dice. That's a fail. They get to mark XP, like learning from your failures. And then the GM gets full control. I'm not even technically sure this is bending the rules, but what I will often do is I will let whatever they want to happen, and I will do something at a distance away from them, like something ominous
Oh,
in the distance. Um,
interesting.
like kind of like basically have like a clock ticking down to midnight, like to their doom, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And so like, but what I'll say is like, okay, you know what, your spell goes off just fine. Don't even worry about it. Don't even worry about it a little bit. I'll just move something in the background. And that scares them like twice as much as if I'd hit them
Yeah.
with an arrow or something.
Yo,
Uh,
yeah, because it's you don't know. It's like the thing behind the screen. You have no idea. That's I should use that because that's
oh, it's the best. It
because
does require
because
you to have some prep though. Like you need to know
mm-hmm.
like what you can move in the background. Um, like for example, for my old podcast, during one season, there was a dragon that was coming. Like basically, like from the jump, everybody was like, the dragon's gonna come at some point during the season. It's basically just a ticking clock. And more or less every time someone failed, but I really didn't want I didn't want them to, I would just
Mm-hmm.
move the dragon closer and they would just
Mm.
groan because they knew what I was doing. Um, and then the other thing, I thought about, um, and these things are sort of tied together. So currently, I'm playing in a game with some friends, and it's a great, great game. Loving the characters. We're playing Dungeon World. Uh, but our GM, she heavily modified the game uh, for two reasons. And it's not for the reasons that we've put forward so far, of like saving characters, helping out,
Ooh,
adjusting the story. One, she heavily modified the leveling up system in order to make leveling up take so much longer.
interesting.
Because she wanted the game to last longer. Like last campaign we did, about half of us had to change classes because we maxed out level and had to kind of like start over because the story wasn't over.
Interesting.
So there was that. She also introduced XP sinks, so we can level up NPCs basically,
Huh.
and they'll give us like benefits. Like if you level up the blacksmith, then they'll give you better. Like you can have your weapons modified.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, you actually have to have a connection with the blacksmith. Like you can't just throw 3 XP at them and then they're like,
Yeah.
we're better friends now. And
Yeah.
she'll be the judge of that. Um,
Right.
So like that's all in service of lengthening the game and like filling out the game. But the other thing she did was Dungeon World doesn't have like an initiative or turn order, but uh, a lot of the like 2 or 3 of the players really struggled last campaign because they didn't know when they could do things.
Uh
Dungeon World is very conversational, and so someone can kind of just jump in whenever. But that really
uh-huh.
didn't work for them. She likes running Dungeon World best. Most of us really, really like the system, but a couple of them are more like hardcore D&D crunch people. Like that's just how their brain works more than
Right.
anything. And so like just to help them out, she basically gave um everybody like we have initiative in like a turn order basically. It's not like strict initiative where we roll for it, but it's just like we kind of just go in an order. And then that order's there for the rest of the battle. Also helps
Fun.
because there are 8 of us. Um players.
Oh my
And
goodness. 8 players.
It actually works, and here's the reason why.
Wow.
We play also sort of on a Discord server, so we do
Uh-huh.
all the story RP stuff, like role-playing stuff,
Oh, like in the
kind of
chat?
in chat during the week, and then we do kind
Nice.
of like the adventure, dungeon crawly, monster hunting stuff in person on the game on game day. Um,
Fun.
I've never actually seen this big a group work before, but it does, and it's super cool. Um, but having the
Very
initiative is
nice.
also just to manage that for her brain. And
Mm-hmm.
she does this thing where she also gives like quote unquote boss monsters a turn, which
Mm,
makes them very scary. Also a good decision. Um,
right.
However, she has been doing a thing lately where she's basically rolling contested against us, which is a very common thing in D&D, like super common thing,
Uh-huh.
where like one player's like, I'll roll a d20, add my strength, and you'll roll your d20 and add strength, and whoever gets the higher one comes out on top. Totally works. In Dungeon World, it doesn't work in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because what it actually means is I could roll a 12, which traditionally in Dungeon World means I succeeded. And failure and a complication is built in already. But if I roll that 12, I'm like, oh, cool, I did it, cool. However, she could still roll a 13, and then I fail
Mm,
anyways. Which means like it feels like you get 2 bites at the fuck up apple, but
right.
only 1 bite at the success apple.
Interesting.
So like I do need to like bring this up with her because I usually feel like a mechanic is bad when it kind of like makes things feel bad for players. So I want to talk to her about it because that's at the heart of good role playing etiquette, I think, as both players
Yeah.
and GMs. Like you should talk. Like if something's up, talk. Um
100%. Yeah.
and so my question is, she's already done this a few times.
Mm-hmm.
What is your opinion on once you've bent the rules and in a quite overt way? What's your opinion on going back on them? That was a very long-winded way to get to this question.
Whew. Um,
And we're not good on
well,
time, so we gotta be concise.
so I will say in more recent play groups, people have been forgiving and we've been able to kind of like it depends on the consequences of the action that I bent the rule, right? Like in
Mhm.
one game it resulted in a player death, and as a result it I couldn't go back, I couldn't just take that back. um and
Probably
it just
not.
kind of and the issue is that I bent the rule one way to save another character, and then that rule that I bent killed another character, and ultimately that group kind of fizzled out because of I don't necessarily think it was because of this decision, but I do feel like a big part of it was because of that decision. And that's like 100% on me as the dungeon master to not protect my players at the table. um, but in more recent groups I've been able to do that. um, be able to retcon some things, but I haven't had as many serious consequences.
Hmm.
um, like even in our masks game, like the most serious consequence that someone had was like they broke an arm, and all in between sessions their arm healed, right? Like time passed.
Yeah.
um and I mean, like, so it's yeah, I think it depends on the severity, right? I think you have to really, because and it also depends on the group, right? Because some groups won't respect you after that, and after that, and then once that happens it's like really hard to keep a group together. But on the other end of the spectrum, like sometimes admitting that you are wrong and that you screwed up, and then taking it back and walking it back, sometimes that can make a group all the stronger. um yeah,
Yeah,
you just kind of gotta read the room, right?
I suppose so. I don't love playing with people who are like, I no longer respect you because you made a decision and then admitted that like you kind of wish you made a mistake. Like I honestly personally I respect somebody way more if they're like, hey, I made this call here and like we're not going to go back on it now because that was 2 sessions ago, but like I don't think I'm going to do that going forward. I don't think that was the right call, and
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Like I'm sorry, but we're not perfect. I
right.
appreciate that. I get when people feel like it suddenly feels kind of arbitrary, but yeah,
Yeah,
like I think it has to be a dialogue, and that's why I think talking with your being able to talk with your GM in particular is super important. Um, like
yeah.
you need to be able to have an open dialogue. with people. That's just good advice. Like, have an open
Yeah.
dialogue with people. Like if
Yeah,
you
with
like,
people, yeah. We should do a 2-part episode: how to have a dialogue with your GM, and then how to have a dialogue with people.
Oh dear. Oh dear. I feel only qualified to talk about one of those.
Yeah, same. But I mean, technically, we are having a dialogue, even
We
if
are.
it's
We are having a dialogue, but I don't think it's
it's
there's
not the
people who
kind of
have
dialogue.
degrees in that. I don't know,
Yeah.
man.
You know what? Maybe we should just stick to make it a 2-part: how to talk to your GM. We
Oof,
should do that
that might be
because
fun.
I'm sure we have a lot of stories and a lot of things we could suggest. Yeah, we should do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But not now and not next week. Maybe after that, but
In the future.
in the future. But that's it for this week. Because we're out of time. But you can see what movies I'm watching on Letterboxd at Benig-Aiello. And Dane, where can we find you and your work?
You can find me on Twitter at Dane_Fogdoll, and you can listen to my show Diceology, which is like the science of dice, on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. I should say, that's in the spelling, like it's diceology, like the spelling. It's not actually about like the science of dice and chance or anything. It's a actual play show where we play role-playing games to tell a
Yeah, and
story for
Shepherds
you.
is out, right?
Shepherds is out. We are, as of recording this, we are currently in our third of 4 games, which
Nice.
sounds very quick, but the fourth game is like 6 times longer than all the other games. So it's like a 2-part arc, and then a 3-part arc, and a 3-part arc, and then like a 20-part arc.
Goodness.
Yeah, so we're just kind of getting going with that one. By the time this is out, I think we'll probably be in on to the final chapter of that, which is the really long chapter. And
Nice.
maybe it's more accurate that we're through the epilogue or the
The
prologue and
prologue
into the
into
proper
the
story. I
story.
don't know how to think about that, but either way,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sounds good. Well, we'll catch you all later.
Catch you later.